I'm going to call this meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education to order. If we could begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Per our rules, we begin every meeting with public comment. I have 3 people signed in for public comment. Could Mr. Mali please come forward?
Humayun Mali, 53 Chester Street. Good evening, honorable members. Great leaders such as Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon to change the world. Education of our children is the most important means to build the best future. We are proud our public school with the impeccable leadership of Honorable Cynthia Paris moving forward. With her awesome leadership after September 13 crisis, kept our public schools open. Superintendent great plan of 100 days just listening to the principals across the Lawrence Public School, to their goals and aspiration. Honorable Superintendent, constructive steps in resolving attendance problem for all schools in our district have been important to make our public school one of the best public schools in our nation. Because of the superintendent's excellent leadership, parental involvement, community involvement is improving. We hope and demand of you to support and approve the new calendar proposal that is beneficial for our teachers' union and our citizens. We must remember in this important election year, need to support our teachers and their union. Teachers are the architect of new future for our future and for our children. We need to support Honorable Frank McLaughlin of Lawrence Teachers Union. Best formula to accomplish and attain the best educational system is to have the best leadership, such as Superintendent Paris, having the best teachers, but we having the best students who are ready to learn, and we are building the best public school. 2019 goal as the year of election, support of our teachers in the era that from California to Virginia, citizen uprising in support of the teachers. Remember, by being involved in education of our children, making the best future for our city, when our children are ready for the best academic progress, with the best wishes for the new year. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Burnham from Lawrence Teachers Union.
Good evening. My name is Lori Burnham. I'm the Vice President of Lawrence Teachers Union, as well as the teacher. I stand before you on behalf of our teachers to show our sincere appreciation to Superintendent Paris for not only supporting our members, but for the approach she has taken to move our district forward. Superintendent Paris has been highly visible throughout the district, already completing 85+ school visits. She listens to and works collaboratively with our teachers, our students, and our parents. She is well aware of the many issues and concerns we face in our community, including high teacher turnover. The school calendar decision that is coming before you is a direct result of the extensive input she has received from teachers, parents, and community members about what is best for Lawrence schools and students. We, the Lawrence Teachers Union, support the superintendent's well-reasoned decision and look forward to strengthening the collaborative relationship we have begun with her. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank McLaughlin, Lawrence Teachers Union.
Good evening and thank you. And thank you for what you do for the children and families of Lawrence. And didn't Laurie do a good job? So that's what's coming. I'm leaving on May the 1st. And I just want to introduce behind me the Lawrence Teachers Union Executive Board, and I'm going to ask them to stand up so that you know them. Okay, so stand up, Executive Board. All right? Laurie Burnham, the Vice President. Kathy Delaney, our Treasurer. Cheryl Travis, our Financial Secretary. And Trish Woolley, our Corresponding Secretary. They're all terrific. So, I'm lucky 6 out of 7 of the Executive Board members are strong Lawrence women. We have a lot of strong Lawrence women in this room. I'm looking at that table, particularly at that student. I am so, so proud that you're sitting there. Okay? You're looking at a man 38 years in the business. I'm so proud that you're sitting at that table. So, I don't want to show my cards because you're the board that debates the policy. You're acting as the receiver, and you're acting for the good of the children, and I thank you for that. But on behalf of the Lawrence Teachers Union Executive Board, I want you to know this as you deliberate tonight, that Superintendent Cynthia Paris has the full support of our Executive Board. The full support, even in things we don't like. I'm here to give her a vote of confidence. I'm here to stand with her. And I'm here to stand with her because she collaborates, she listens. No other superintendent has faced the crisis in the city of Lawrence that she faced. No other superintendent in the Commonwealth has come in after receivership to take the mantle and bring the city forward. This city has moved forward significantly since Jeff Rowley was the receiver. And Cynthia Paris is here to lead us in the next steps. I know that the families, the students, and the teachers are very proud to know that this listener is with us. So with that, that's what I wanted to say. I want to, again, thank you, particularly the student, okay, because we need student voice if we're going to go forward. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks to all who made public comment. Before I turn it over to the superintendent for her presentation, I do want to note what President McLaughlin was referencing as well. But tonight is our first meeting in which our student representative has been seated. Elma Taveras, who goes by Gabby, is a student at High School Learning Center. And has been doing a lot of great work there out in the community, and we are thrilled that she's going to also contribute to LAE with that critical student voice and perspective. So, Gabby, we are thrilled to have you, and I don't know if you want to say a few words. You don't have to, but if you want to say a few words, we'd welcome it.
Can you hear me? Okay, so first of all, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is having a great day. Like he said, my name is Gabriela Taveras. You can call me Gabby. I am super excited to be here, and I'm very glad to meet you all and have this amazing experience with you. Thank you.
So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Paris for her report, which will feature a presentation on her 100-day listening tour.
Great, thank you so much. Gabi, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to see you again. I have to say that you're part of my report tonight, not in specifics, but in terms of the many, many students that I met with. I remember meeting you at one of the forums. So I really appreciate the input that you gave me.
Thank you.
Great, so tonight I thought I would start and frame this presentation for you by sort of sharing process. Then I thought I would share with you the many strengths that I have learned about our district, then followed by considerations and emerging themes that I've learned from, and followed by next steps. So I arrived in Lawrence late this summer, and it's already been mentioned the multiple opportunities that I had to get to know the strengths of the community, to get to know some of the challenges in our community. But overall, I have to say that I've said this before in other big meetings and community groups. My learning has been accelerated by those opportunities, as I said, for challenges, and I have been encountered with multiple stakeholders who are incredibly generous of spirit and incredibly generous of information, and their willingness to share with me. As I asked 3 questions throughout this listening tour, I asked all of my stakeholders the following 3 questions. I said, tell me what's working, tell me what you think I should be paying attention to, and then tell me what are your expectations of me. This last question I asked really honestly. I think it's important that everyone has the opportunity to say, you know, here's what's important to us as superintendent. Here's what we are expecting and think that we need from you. So I want to start by saying that I also had the opportunity to look at many documents. So documents included formative data. It included many financial records. It included prior turnaround, prior school-based documents. The list is enormous to mention. I thought about compiling this in terms of an appendix. I'm happy to share with people individually, and as I continue to share these findings, all of the reports that I had to read and looked at, but more importantly, I want to share with you conversations that I had with everyone and my summaries of those. I'll start with strengths, with our many. Oops, excuse me. Let me go back to strengths, and I'll look at my notes now. So for strengths, I found that the open architecture is very favorable with our administrators and teachers. In particular, school leaders and teachers like the autonomies in budget and professional development, their ability to think through their staffing models, their ability to think about their school-based schedules. The other thing that I found as a strength are our cutting-edge new curriculums that we have adopted, in particular our ELA curriculums in the lower grades, so K through 8, also our science curriculum. Another strength that I found was the expanded learning time and how schools have been thoughtful about using the extended times. The amount of partners that we have a really deep roster of partners who help us think through how to use the expanded learning time. Another strength that I found was, these are more emerging kind of strengths that the district has, which is social emotional learning practices and inclusion practices. In particular, I found that inclusion practices for our students on the autism spectrum disorder are strong. Other strengths that I found were in the enrichment opportunities. Since receivership, we have really focused and had resources devoted to things like arts. We have devoted things in the theater department. Our schools have taken the opportunity to think through what is important to our students and families, and so the enrichments are very favorable, and families, students, and teachers alike. The other thing that I found as a strength, as I had mentioned before, is all of our partners. We have several EMOs that partner with us. We have after-school partners. We have community partners. We have college partners. It is a deep and strong and robust list of partners. I want to share with you and spend more time on some of the emerging themes. So here's the emerging themes. These themes are not listed by order of priority, but rather I thought that we would take them one by one and then think about some of the questions that were raised. All of these themes are gathered by stakeholder groups. So when I thought about how do I present all of the learning, I decided that I would take the big buckets and then go across my data points and think about all the stakeholders. So there were many, many other things that you might be wondering later on that did come up in my conversations, but they weren't addressed by all stakeholders. So these big four ones were addressed and mentioned by all stakeholders. So the first one is improving teacher recruitment and retention. The second one is strengthening systems to support at-risk students. The third one is reshaping the high school redesign plan. And lastly, ensuring equitable distribution of resources. I'll break these down, and then I'll take questions from you all. This is in your document, so you have a better listing of this if you want to follow along, and I'll walk us through some of this. Here are some of the major findings in terms of improving teacher recruitment and retention. I won't read them all, but I'll highlight a few of them. So for example, I learned that the district has advanced and master's education program, and this is designed to recognize high-performing teachers and to promote teacher leadership. I also learned that teacher supervision and evaluation practices are favorable across the district, and that's by our teachers and by our school leaders. I also learned that we have TLTs in place. These are teacher leadership team structures, and they provide decision-making opportunities for our teachers with school leaders. And lastly, I also learned, and again, I'm just highlighting a few of these here, I also learned that teachers and paras and administration wish that we would have more training time and targeted feedback across the district that they would feel they have greater expertise in. And some of this I'll discuss later. Some of the questions that I have and opportunities for growth are wonderings about, can we strengthen hiring practice to ensure that we make decisions earlier on? This emphasis on hiring and continuing to think about diversifying our staff, in particular staff that are bilingual and bicultural. And then again, this opportunity to develop professional collaboration and shared decision-making with staff members. We're moving on to the second theme. This is strengthening systems to support at-risk students. And I'll highlight some of the major findings include transitioning for students with special learning needs from our middle and high schools. So in this example, I spoke to parents and I spoke to teachers where they have meetings, for example, we call these transition meetings, but they're unclear across those two levels and not consistent practices. Another finding is our staff that support students that are in our special needs. For example, speech pathologists, psychologists. Those caseloads I learned that are high, and then we also have challenges in finding personnel to cover that. Two other things that I'll highlight here is that our teachers and our principals express the need for additional behavioral, social, emotional, and mental health support. As you can imagine, our population, our demographics, has a lot of students who experience trauma, who have mental illnesses, and who have behavioral challenges, so that was expressed across our stakeholders. And lastly, the social emotional practices and curriculum are evident, as I had mentioned earlier, across the district. Some of the questions and opportunities for growth include wonderings about how do we strengthen the structures and the practices across the district that will anchor supports. We also wonderings about the allocation formula and resources to ensure this equity challenge. Two other things that I'll highlight. Consideration for a response to intervention and staff and sufficient staffing levels. And lastly, our collaboration, continued collaboration with the CPAC and partners for enhanced and robust continuum of services. We'll move on to the third emerging theme. That's reshaping the high school redesign plan. I learned that many of our students are having a wonderful experience. In particular, juniors and seniors participate in early college courses. They also have access to college and career counseling. And our 11th and 12th grade students participate in career readiness curriculum. Another thing I'll highlight here is that our high school is on track for reaccreditation this spring. I'll move on to some of the wonderings and opportunities for growth. There is a continued sort of perception that there is lack of perceived progress in our high school. I think we can do a better job at marketing and ensuring that we talk about all the wonderful things that are happening for our students. And the high school redesign process will take place in April, and we'll have an opportunity for stakeholder input. The last emerging theme is ensuring equitable distribution of resources, and I'll highlight some of our major findings. So again, open architecture and school-level autonomy rates very highly among our school leaders and staff. Enrichment opportunities are increasing and favored among students and families and staff. There is a focus on the arts, as I had mentioned initially, and there's financial support for it as well. And then I'll also highlight that English learners' resources are perceived to be an equitable distribution across our district. I'll move us into the opportunities and wonderings, and I'll highlight a couple of these as well. So transparency of funding sources among our families is a wondering. I got that pretty much across with our families and staff members. They just wondered, how does this school get this amount of resources? How does this school get to have this level of flexibilities or autonomies? Those were wonderings that teachers and school leaders and families in particular had. There was also wonderings about communication strategies that offer feedback and establishes trust, and that's sort of a wondering. Is there a way that we can think about ways that we can communicate so that, in particular, our families and staff continue to trust that this issue of resources is equitable under open architecture? And lastly, offering trainings and learning workshops on the open architecture model for families and community is a wondering that we have. We wonder if we did further communication and sort of learning with our families and staff members and the community on what the model looks like, they would have less questions about how do we get those resources. As I had mentioned earlier, these are all wonderings that we have. In terms of process, this was a process that I was able to work with leadership. I was able to share this with our principals and check for accuracy. And then over the coming months, in collaboration with you all, in collaboration, of course, with the school leaders, central office, we're going to begin the work of thinking through some of our goals. We'll think about what that looks like in the turnaround plan, and then come back and preview it with you all. So I'll take questions, and if you want, we can go step by step. We can start with the emerging themes or wonderings or findings, whatever people, whatever's on your mind.
Questions from LAE members? Pat?
I'll start. Superintendent, I want to commend you for this process, this listening tour. I think you really have a clear picture of who we are and where we need to go. But I'd like to bring one thing up that really resonated with me, and it was that when you were talking about the teachers, teacher recruitment, nearly 50% of our teachers have less than 5 years of teaching experience. That to me is critical, and I think we need to make sure we're supporting our teachers in the early stages of their career so that they become master teachers. So there should be some kind of a plan in place that PD or whatever is available to the teachers to ensure that they stay with us for the long term.
The other wondering is, can we think through our onboarding sort of systems also, and how we support teachers early on to include professional development?
But thank you very much for doing this.
Jess?
Okay. So I want to echo Pat's point. I think that point about teacher recruitment and retention is super important. And I wonder whether there's a format that I think has been really useful in a number of different fields. It's kind of this idea of design thinking and figuring out how we can do this kind of thing better. And one of the things that I might suggest is, because from my perspective, one of the things that I think is not, we need to improve teacher recruitment and retention, we need more bilingual and bicultural teachers, and part of the way we need to do that is we need like local sourcing, right, for teachers, and not just local sourcing, right, because good people can come from outside the city as well, but I do think we should be growing our own as well, and I wonder whether we could have some kind of design process where we're getting some current teachers, maybe especially like sort of first and second and third year teachers, maybe getting some folks who are local teachers, some folks who are high school seniors who might be thinking of teaching as a profession, and get them together in a room over time to kind of dig into this question, right? Like, what do you need in order to make this your career path in life? And once you are on that path, what are the kinds of things that support you in staying in place? What builds a sense of community for you? What makes you feel like you're on the right trajectory? You know, so that as we think about how we address this question, we're designing an intervention that's responsive to the kind of constituency that we want to develop and attract, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Mayor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to speak on that first piece. I think that enough's been said on it, but I just want to say that we do have tools at the city if you need to, in helping with the recruitment and retention. We specifically have targeted a portion of our first-time homebuyers program for teachers. And so if part of the reason why people weren't using it before was because if you made too much money, you couldn't avail yourself of that program. So we changed the guidelines around it with the help of HUD, so that some teachers who would fall into the category of not making too much money couldn't participate in it. And if it's still a problem for us to get more teachers involved in it, just let us know so we can refit it. But between hiring and recruiting homegrown teachers and police officers, I'm not really sure that we can do anything more important than those two things. And we've been pretty successful in the police department, mostly because you can't, it's like a hiring thing. You have to live and come from the city of Lawrence. You have to take the test while you're in Lawrence. But we want to make sure that we're taking as much as we can, so we have tools to help you with that. My question is more around the reshaping of the high school redesign plan. You know, I felt that we were rushing to get to redesign at the high school to meet some thing that the state wanted us to do, and I'm concerned that in that rush we might have missed something, or we went in a direction that might have been great for everybody. Do you see that part of this is to slow that progression to a point where you can adjust? And I know it's kind of like changing a tire while the car is moving. But is there going to be a new conversation about some of that design of that plan? Because one of the things that didn't get mentioned a lot in there, and you know that this is no fault of the team on the ground here, but just to getting the job done for DESE, issues around the number of guidance counselors and even guidance counselor management. I'm not really sure that was a big part of it. So I don't know if we're going to have an opportunity to change the redesign plan.
Yeah, in fact, this is timely because we're up for redesign grants funding, so that's one aspect of it, and so we can think through what are goals that we can design right now that will be measurable in the next school year. In addition, we're going to think through how do we do on our last goals, right? And yeah, the answer is I think this is a good pause opportunity to say, did this work? What's working? And now that we have an opportunity to redesign some of those goals, this is the right time for it.
I'm glad to hear that.
Other questions, comments, Julia?
Yes, thank you, John. Continuing on with Pat and Jess' comments, perhaps something could be worked out with the local colleges to develop some type of a program similar to the programs that have been created for nursing or you know, billing assistance or pharmacy. Because a lot of the teachers that have been recruited in the last 10 years, I want to say, have not necessarily gone out to become teachers. They have fallen into this position because they were probably unable to find other types of jobs. And maybe that explains a little bit of why the high turnover. So maybe if we have programs in place where we can start cultivating, you know, from high school on, some of these young students that might have an interest in teaching, that might be something that would help in retention. I don't know whether, you know, there's such a program or if there's anything like that, but if there is, and I'm sure that some of the local colleges might be interested in developing something.
I want to say something. There is, and one of the things that we're doing at the college is we're providing services to professionals in the city that have degrees from other countries to validate their degrees and then help them through the process of getting a license to become teachers in the school system. We already have some people that are doing that. And also starting with the paraprofessionals all the way to teachers. More has to be done and should be done because we have a lot of talented people in the city that are professional that can use their degrees.
And my other point is on how do we highlight the students' work, the positive work that the students are doing in the city. We've always had that has always been a challenge in terms of highlighting the positive image of the city in general, particularly that of the students. And I don't know if there is a student newspaper that maybe we could get some of the local businesses to sponsor so that that newspaper, it's distributed throughout the city, highlighting all of the work that is being done in the different schools. Just those 2 points.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Jess?
I just had one more thing. You know, and this, I will freely say this is probably an area that I know the least about in terms of the special education part of it, but it is an area that I hear a lot from people about in terms of the general feeling that it is under-resourced, and not necessarily through a fault of LPS, but it seems that there's a great need for just more resources in that area. And I guess I'm just wondering, I know that there's conversation going on at the state level about the school funding formula, and, you know, if that kind of works out in our favor, whether we'll be able to direct some of those increased resources in that area, or if that doesn't play out in a way that we would like, where are we going to find? And is that perception that I have true, that there's just like not enough resources? And if so, where are we going to get the resources to kind of help beef that up?
Yeah, we will always argue that additional resources are needed, of course. And I think in part, in part it's perception, and in part is multi-layered thinking about the professional development that we're offering, the capacity building, especially now that we're committed to inclusion. That just feels like, you know, a belief system and a philosophy that we've adopted. And so getting the additional training is important. That's one thing. The other thing that we're going to tease out quite a bit, Jess, is that special education and student services are two different things. So mental illness is sort of in one own bucket. Behavioral students are in a different bucket. Students with special learning needs are in a different bucket. And we tend to lump them all together. And so that's also work that we're going to be doing quite a bit of, and thinking through how do we support our teachers, how do we continue to partner with our families to make sure that our students are getting in that continuum of student services, the right services, not just under special education.
Yeah. Okay.
Ventura?
It's a quick point. Just echoing everything about the amount of work that went into this. I mean, this is really helpful to read. I guess I have just two very quick questions. One is, I'm just curious, going through this process, if there's anything that surprised you, like what, going into this and then now looking at it at the back end, like, again, something that surprised you, I'm curious. And then the second is, I know that part of the work is to take this and revise turnaround plan and think about that, but is there a plan to share this with the people that you interviewed, and if so, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll start with the process for sort of sharing with other stakeholders. So the answer is yes. I'm looking forward to, discussing it with you all and getting feedback and thinking through other ways of sharing with different stakeholders. So in the next coming weeks, I'd like to also share with families and different opportunities that I have upcoming. I definitely will share it with teachers, of course. And our principals are going to be helping with that because there will be sort of a broader sharing and then smaller groups and then individual conversations. So I'm looking forward to that as well. We'll make it a public document where it gets posted, and then we gather different ways of getting that input and feedback, because if we decide together that we're going to be making changes to the turnaround plan, we will need community input and we'll start a different process. So your question about surprises, I don't know how to answer that. I think everything was surprising along the way. For me, the context was new. And my biggest worry, Ventura, was to just encompass across, because there was so much that was being shared, and making sure that I had summarized as much as possible. And so what you see here is what I said earlier. There were many other smaller things that came up across particular stakeholder groups, but these were the big, big, big ones that were shared for all stakeholders. So, yeah.
Other comments, questions? Yep. Mayor?
Food didn't show up?
Actually,
I'm not asking for myself, although I'm eating.
Well, it did, and again, you might have like a long list of things like, what about this and what about that? I'm probably going to nod my head and say, yeah, it did, but not across all stakeholder groups, or enough to sort of emerge, right? So, yeah, the answer is yes, it did come up.
All right. Again, for the record, not for me.
Yeah, right.
Other comments, questions, concerns? I'll just offer one in closing. I think that this reflects a great deal of work by you, Superintendent, in your initial time here, and we appreciate that. And I know you're very mindful of how this moves toward decisions on the turnaround plan, and this board will take that up soon as well, so that oftentimes this covers the big picture, but a lot of the details are covered inside the turnaround plan. So I just want to note that in just saying that I do hope that family engagement will play a central role, and not as a standalone item, but one that flows through all of the priorities that you have spelled out in your report tonight. All right, with that, Superintendent, I don't know if you want to offer any closing remarks on.
I think I'll just underscore that I really appreciate the openness of the community. I really, all the time that everyone took and was so honest and earnest and open to sharing. So I just want to say thank you again.
Thank you, Superintendent. All right, before we get to the enrollment presentation update, I'm going to cover a couple of pieces in my report. So I'm going to designate members for two subcommittees right now. One is a subcommittee on chronic absence, and I'm going to appoint Pat Mariano, Jess Anders, and Noemi Custodia Laura to that subcommittee. The superintendent will be in touch on that. As you remember from some of the initial conversations we had when the data from last year came back from the state, chronic absence was one of the issues that was flagged. And I think then was likely then even compounded. The superintendent, I think, had some really strong ideas right off the bat to get to work on that, but I think that was then difficulties compounded by the crisis that Lawrence found itself in. So this subcommittee will come together to discuss the issue generally, but also, I believe, some changes that the superintendent is hoping to make and hoping you will consider.
Are you putting me on this because I always take my son out of school on his birthday?
I'm putting you on this because you said no to being on the budget committee. Which leads me to my next one, and there'll be a short trivia question after, but for the budget subcommittee, I'm appointing myself, Mayor Rivera, Ventura Rodriguez, Pat Mariano, and Julia Silverio. My trivia question is, which member of the board was appointed to 2 committees? Pat, yeah, you got it. Jess, you get it. The prize is you get appointed to the next subcommittee, yeah, that we have. And we'll talk a little bit more about the process later on when we come up on budget guidelines and a budget process update. And I just want to say to all 5 members, we would love to have you involved as much as possible. The superintendent has already sent out invitations to individual school budget meetings. No one is expected to go to all of those at this board or to any for that matter, but the invitation was graciously extended by the superintendent if you wanted to go see on the ground level the meetings happening between central office and individual schools around the budget. The budget subcommittee will have, I believe, 3 meetings of its own on budget, and I think I can say safely that we will have a quorum at all of those meetings, so folks who feel like their schedules are stretched thin, you don't have to feel like you have to be at every one, but I know there are enough of us in that 5 who will be at each one, but we can cover more of that when we get to the budget section of the agenda. The last piece on my report I just want to say was I attended my 2nd inclusion steering committee meeting at the Weatherby with teachers and school leaders from multiple schools in the district who have been doing this great work on building out inclusive learning models, particularly for children on the autism spectrum, and I think to the point Jess made earlier, facing challenges as they do it, not easy work, but very committed school leaders and teachers who are doing their best to make this successful for all of our children in Lawrence. Any comments or questions or concerns on any items that won't be covered on the agenda as you look at it from any members right now? Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to the superintendent, as I know she has folks on her team who want to give an enrollment update.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to ask Denise Snyder to join us, and while they're getting set up, I just wanted to add 2 quick things on the subcommittee. So for the subcommittee that is going to be addressing a chronic absenteeism, we're going to be inviting you all to help us with our attendance policy, and Denise Snyder is going to be facilitating that subcommittee. And of course, with the budget committees, as John had mentioned, you're all welcome to attend. I wanted to give you a flavor of what those meetings look like. So for example, today we held several of them. And what that looks like is we ask school leaders to come ready to make proposals, staffing proposals, any changes, including retirements, new hires. We ask them questions about their calendars. We ask them their overall arching goals. And we conclude by having them give us a wish list of things that they would like to add or move around in their budgets. It's a comprehensive way of thinking through our individual school budgets, and so we invite you to join us as you have time. And so with that said, we are going to have Denise Snyder And Denise, why don't you just introduce yourselves and tell us what's happening? It's an update on our enrollment.
Correct. So Denise Snyder, Deputy Assistant Superintendent in the district. I also want to thank Liz Young for joining me tonight. She was here in September. She is the enrollment manager at the FRC. So Liz is actually on the ground doing all of the work. So first, thanks to her. We were here in September with all of you to do a presentation on enrollment capacity, sort of supply and demand. And you might remember we took sort of a trip neighborhood by neighborhood to indicate the growth in student enrollment over the last decade. And we promised to come back with both an update and some ideas around solutions. So that's what we're here to do this evening. So let's see if I can, yeah, all right. So to quote Keith Eddings, which I may or may not do again in my future, but
motion that we do not.
Last month he did publish an article that talked about how the residency in Lawrence has vastly expanded over time, and the reality that we're up 10,000 residents over the last decade, and just how huge that is for Lawrence. The point here being that not every single resident in the city equates to another student in the schools, but it does equate to more students in the schools, clearly. And we showed that in September, and we will show it again a little bit tonight. So this was a slide from September, and in short, for those folks who can't see it, such as myself from here, it merely indicates growth over time, and the reality is that in the last 10 years, our student population has increased by 1,500 students, so 1,500 students over the last decade. This is what it looks like in January. For folks who are not familiar with our enrollment patterns, we see, as you might expect, our largest enrollment period in August and early September, leading up to and at the start of the school year. However, we also see another bump in January. There is a tradition and evidence of a wave of immigration that bumps up our numbers in January further still. As you can see, almost consistently, those numbers in January enrollment also go up almost every single year. There was a decrease in 2011-12 by a little bit. And this year is slightly down from last year, which in general is great news, because if you recall, we're bursting at the seams. However, I just need to clarify what caused that decrease, and that is primarily the reality that last year's numbers included a spike because of Hurricane Maria. We took in nearly 200 students from Hurricane Maria. About 85 or 7 are still with us, but we have a lot of those families have since returned home, and we did not have the same type of natural disaster this year that would have seen another spike. So that is the little reason for the dip, or the dip for the little dip. I want to show you what happens with classroom sizes when we have expanding demand. And so I'm giving you 3 examples of that here. In the first example of the Leahy, this is grade 4 at the Leahy School, and you will see that here the rooms are capped at 27, and most of the classrooms are now at 25 and 26. So there's a seat, maybe 2, left in each of the 4 classrooms at the Leahy. Another example of what this looks like in our city is up Oliver. This is a grade 8 classroom. Here the cap is 30, and we are at 30 or 29 in almost every instance. So we are all but 2 seats out of space at Up Oliver. And the last one that I'll show you here, although there are certainly other ones, is the Arlington Middle School, and this is grade 6. That cap is 29. We're full at 29, with the exception of 1 classroom that has 2 remaining seats. And it's February. It's not the end of the school year. More children will come. This is a challenge we face every year, but it's getting tough, and I'm going to walk through, what happens both when we hit that cap and also what are we going to do about some of this. So I've been talking about a cap. I'm sorry, Mayor, did you have a question?
Over the cap for the Leahy, the Arlington, and the Oliver again?
Sure, so the Leahy is at 27 is the cap for, first grade is a little bit lower than that, but is 27 for 4th grade. The Arlington is 29, and Up Oliver is 30. And those caps are decided.
That's all 4th grades?
Pardon me?
Grades 4, 6, and
Oh, 6 and 8.
Yep. Caps are primarily decided, well, 1 on best practices, and then 2 when we still need more space. What a room can actually hold, right? So the Leahy is a very small school. We're not going to put 29 students in a classroom. We're going to try and keep a couple of less per classroom. So there's why you might see 29 versus 28 versus 30. Also, some of the contracts with the charter-based management companies have, reached different caps. So I'm going to show you a little example of what happens, though, when we do reach our caps. So in this example, come on, there we go. We have 3 schools, the red, the blue, the yellow. And student number 1 lives in the zone for the red school. However, she goes to enroll in school in 2nd grade, and all of the classes are full. We're not going to make her another student above that cap. Instead, we're going to assign her to the closest school that has capacity. So that's the blue school. So now student number 1 is at the blue school. Student number 2, also in 2nd grade, comes and enrolls with us a couple weeks later. Unfortunately, the blue school is now full. We look for another school closest to home with available capacity. That's the yellow school. So now this child is now going to a school slightly outside of his zone to the next closest one. And as you might imagine, a couple weeks later, student number 3 comes along and registers for 2nd grade, and the yellow school is now full. This happens. We wish it didn't, and we work hard to make sure that it happens as minimally as possible, but it does happen. This child, in this case, we say, where does this child go? If every single school within a reasonable amount of space is full, we're going to increase the cap by 1. So that student ends up going back to the red school. And obviously that comes with challenges because honestly, students number 1 and 2 should have been able to go to their schools, and instead number 3 is going where number 1 could have gone, right? So this creates a revolving door, which does not promote our neighborhood school policy. This is what we try really hard to keep from happening, but as I said, it does happen. It's a reality. So that takes us to solutions. Right, so I want to talk about what we've been trying to do not to get to there, and then what we hope to do as we move along. So, everyone knows, and we're very excited about, the much anticipated renovations and expansions at the Oliver Partnership School as well as at the Leahy School. In each of those instances, we're aiming to practically double capacity. That's great news. The bad news is it's 3 to 6 years away for each of those schools, 3 for Oliver Partnership, 6 for the Leahy. And we can't wait that long for some immediate solutions. So a couple years ago, we started to look at some short-term fixes. One of those was to increase the caps on classroom sizes. Kindergarten and 1st grade, we would normally call best practice at 22, and we've stretched that to 25 in most of our schools. Grades 2 to 8, we've moved that cap from 25 to 27 to 30 based on classroom size, which I just talked about. We also adjusted some school boundaries. So if we were able to take a marginal street that we could then maybe shave off of one school's boundary and move to another school, we could do that up front without having to play that cap school classroom closing game that I just showed you. And also we removed kindergarten from the Leahy. We placed 2 kindergarten classrooms, one at the Lawler, one at the Rollins, to accommodate expansions in grade 4 and 5 that were desperately needed. And you might think back to seeing that the Leahy is once again practically full at 4th grade.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you guys increase the cap and the classroom size,
Yep.
what's the corresponding staffing changes or augmentation that happens to support that?
It varies, and we have, dependent on budget, been able to provide paraprofessional support in many of these classrooms.
Okay, but it's not just a matter of course that if the cap goes up, a para gets assigned.
I think that is best practice, and as long as there's money in the budget, I know last year we added several paras as we expanded classrooms.
Okay.
Just that's one way that we do it. I'll give you another example. This year we had kindergarten classroom where the cap exceeded, the student was big, so we added another classroom in terms to lower the class size. So that's another way of doing it.
And when we
We
were
try not to
fortunate
do
have
that, it's very
space.
disruptive. So if the school has the space,
Yep.
in this example, they had the space to add another classroom, and so we can reduce the class size. But many instances, there's no room for that, to add.
Right.
And so then we add support staff in cases.
Right. I mean, I know that I'm stating the obvious. It just seems like both for like the educational process, for teacher morale and support, like
right.
you need if the class is bigger, you need more support.
It also varies which grade it is.
Yeah.
So another example is in our upper grades, we have, this will come up momentarily, but we have one of our middle schools that's pretty big, and we can't reduce the size by adding classrooms. So in that case, we add support personnel. So it varies also. In the example of the it's kindergartners, right? So you can't have 26, 27 kindergartners for the one teacher, even when you add a paraprofessional. Developmentally, that's just really, really challenging.
Yeah.
Right. So those were some of the solutions from 2 years ago, and you know, it's not a big surprise, right? I think we've come each year to talk about supply and demand challenges. When we look at some solutions from last year, we added a classroom at the Weatherby at grade 3, at Oliver Partnerships School at grade 2, to address some elementary grade stress on both sides. It was just one classroom. It's what we call a bubble classroom, and the class will grow and follow the students. So the grade 3 at the Weatherby will become grade 4 next year, grade 5 the year after, because it's just the one classroom, because none of our schools can find enough classrooms to add a full cohort, right? We can't add for each level. We also added kindergarten class at the Partham, which was the example that the superintendent just mentioned. And we held those increased class size caps from 2017-18. And then finally, we continued to adjust a few of the boundaries around some of our schools to make sure schools feel equitably, and that keeps us out of that closing classroom scenario that I showed you. So this year, there are a few things that we're recommending. One is to continue those increased classroom sizes. The other is a few more adjustments around boundaries. And both the bubble classroom at the Weatherby and the Oliver Partnership School will continue. But we wanted to bring to your attention a larger solution for another issue, and that was the issue that I showed you around the Arlington Middle School 6th grade, which is at 29 in most of the classrooms. This slide, the highlighted yellow area represents growth over each year, and as you'll see, more than 100 additional students since school year 14-15. So that's pretty amazing growth. We have growth around the district. I mean, CDA has added about 40 new students. Tarbox has held the same, give or take a few, but the Arlington has added 100 new students. The Arlington receives its students from two places. One is Community Day Academy, which shares a building, and the other is with the Tarbox School. Currently, the Tarbox rising sixth graders, half of them go to Up Oliver, the other half go to Arlington Middle School. We are proposing in this remedy to send and reassign the 20 or 25 students who would normally go to Arlington Middle to reconfigure that area so that they go to Up Leonard instead. And that would be with transportation, because it is not exactly a neighborhood school, and we recognize that. But we have looked around.
It's not a neighborhood school in any definition of that word, right? Say it's not exactly means it could be close to, but it's not a neighborhood school.
No, it's not a neighborhood school. Unfortunately, the Arlington doesn't have another neighborhood school that serves these grades. And we looked around, and Up Leonard is the only other school that has capacity. It's a high-performing school. And as you'll see here, if you look at what this would do for classroom sizes, while Up Leonard's 7th and 8th grades are rather large, we did some reconfiguring of boundaries that brought down their numbers almost a little too well, so that they're at 19, 17, 21 in a classroom. If we move the 20 to 25 students to Up Leonard, you'll see that all of those classrooms between the Arlington and Up Leonard will hover between 21 and 25. That is a much healthier number for student learning. It's a lot more productive for children. So in order to do this, there are several things we want to do, right? We want to make sure that this move would work for families above and beyond everything else. So we want to ensure accessibility. We want to strengthen and have a very strong transition plan in place to support students and their families in recognizing and making Up Leonard their new home. And we want to make sure that they are warmly welcomed into this community and feel like from the get-go that they're part of the community. There'll be some investment of resources to make that happen. One is that, as I said, school bus transportation would be provided for these students. Not only school bus transportation, but we would have a regular bus run and a late bus run at the end of the school day so that the students could participate in after-school programming at the school if they so desired. Again, we want to make sure that they have access to absolutely everything that traditional Up Leonard students would have. In addition to that, we want to make sure that families feel welcome and also have accessibility, and so there will be funding for a school bus shuttle to ensure that for those evening events that those families in the neighborhood can be picked up from the Tarbox, brought to Up Leonard, returned to the Tarbox at the end of an event, so that location and accessibility does not create a problem or a barrier. The next steps for this is we'll actually be meeting with families this week on Wednesday. We have 2 meetings, one in the morning and one in the evening, for the impacted families to explain this transition. Families were mailed home an invitation just before school vacation week. Liz and her team called every single family on that invitation list on Friday to make sure they got the invitation and that they understood what it was about. The principal again backpacked home the invitation with a personal note on each of those, encouraging folks to attend this meeting on Tuesday. So we will walk through what this means for them, the benefits. The principal at Up Leonard will be there giving a presentation about the school. We'll also explain to families that we know that there will be some families for whom this is too much of a burden. And we do have a variance process in place that would allow them to continue at the Arlington if that is what they need to do. But our goal really is to drive down that number and get as many families as possible to be able to adapt to Up Leonard as their new home school. And then finally, we will be working with the principal at Up Leonard to design a transition event this summer so that folks feel really integrated into the community. That's the end of the presentation. Those are the steps that we've really worked hard as we've struggled for what are short-term solutions. No one wants to acquire a building, no one wants to rent a building, knowing that in a couple of years we will have space we need. So we need short-term solutions that are really going to serve our children well.
John? Thank you, Denise. That's a really clear picture of what's happening within our school system. My statement will probably be more political than school related, to the point that, is there any way with school choice that we could work for the next few years with some of the surrounding cities and towns to maybe be able to accommodate some of those students, and especially because we're looking at all the issues that we're going to be faced with in terms of transportation and all of those things, and the accommodation for parents. And also, is this something that and probably DESE would have to deal with something like this if this happened? When we make our budget for the different schools, do we take into consideration that these changes are going to take place during the school year?
So yes, I'll answer your second question first. Absolutely. One of the things that is all in the timing, right? We have been working on solutions. Each year we come forward with some new ones, but we start this process in October so that we can engage schools around potential solutions so that the cost of the changes are included in their budget requests and allocations. Absolutely. And then the second one, I think, is a broader question that I'm just going to leave wide open because, why not? I don't think we can leave any stone unturned, but I think it, requires a deeper conversation.
Right, it would, but I just feel that we would be paying for these students anyways to go to the other districts. Am I correct? With a school choice.
You mean in a formal school choice where people can go to schools in neighboring communities?
Correct.
That would come from our budget, yes.
Exactly, and we've already taken into account that these changes will happen during the school year. But I'm thinking more in a wider way of immersion, where we have an issue sometimes with a lot of our students being separated or not integrated enough. Mm-hmm. And maybe this would be a way of getting some of these students to be a little bit more integrated into the whole school population by having them attend different schools. It's just a thought, and I'm wondering if it's something that could be taken into consideration.
Duly noted. Thank you. We can definitely discuss.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Mayor? I don't know. This is troubling. And I know that you guys, this is a solution, but I'm not really sure it's a solution I can support. I wasn't trying to be funny with saying that it's not a neighborhood school at all. I think the Oliver's actually, the Leonard school that I went to as a child, I think actually poorly fit to grow the population in that building.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The Leonard itself is a poorly fit building to add more bodies to that building. It's a small school to begin with. And so that on top of the transportation issues and, again, doing this also doesn't, if I get this right, the presentation right, you're still gonna bump the classroom sizes.
So we're going to bump the classroom sizes at Up Leonard, as I showed in the slide, from the 17 or 18 children to 21, 22, 24 children, which again is much lower. I mean, pardon me?
The caps remain.
Right, so the caps remain, but here you go in this slide.
Bump the caps, though.
So if a cap is 29, but that's higher than we want it to be, making these changes would allow both Arlington and Up Leonard's classroom sizes to be right-sized, if you will, to be 21 to 25 in a classroom. Neither one of them is any longer at 28, 29, 30 students. In Arlington, the last thing we want to do is move children away from their neighborhood school. The very last thing, well, the second to last thing. I'll tell you what the last thing is. The last thing is it would, I think, break my heart and probably many others to take away an enrichment opportunity. So take away computer room, take away science, take away something to make space. I'm sure you've been in these buildings. You know, we look and look and look for space. We walk them all the time looking for space. People kind of dislike when I show up in their buildings and like, oh, can you open that door? Can I see inside there? And think about whether or not I can make it a classroom.
Yeah, I think this, I say it's troubling, but I want to just, you know, appreciate the intensity of the problem and also the creativity that went into fixing it. I don't want to.
No offense.
You guys are trying to solve Chinese algebra. Yeah. And so the thing that I would suggest, and I think, you know, before we upend the world of this whole class, again, these kids only have one shot at this grade level. So if we're doing this stuff and they're going to the Leonard for that one grade level or two grade levels.
They'll stay the whole 3 years. And in fact, that's the reality, is that all the kids in those streets for the next 3 years or until we have, you know, the expansion in the other schools would, you know, that would be their new.
So those cohorts will have the non-neighborhood experience.
Yes. That is correct.
Busing and all the madness around.
That is correct, yeah.
And I think that that's significant enough that we should probably have a conversation about if there's commercial space in and around the Arlington school, which there is, that we could, you know, engage in finding space for. This is, before you got to this slide, I was like, we have to have this presentation for the city council. Because I think this is very telling, and the graphic about moving the children around, I think is very telling, and I think it just talks about the need for this, and I say that knowing that there's gonna, you know, you could probably get to the answer in a summer. I mean, I'm not, no pressure, Chris Merlino and his staff, but to a place where you can have classrooms that are habitable and safe and a proper learning environment that can do two things, which is, one, keep them in the neighborhood, and also bring back, right-size the classroom, as you said, to a number that's speakable. Like I said, I walked to the Leonard.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine kids who have spent their whole life walking to the Tarbucks, then seeing half their friends go to the Arlington.
Go to Up Oliver now.
To the Arlington. Right. Not the Up Oliver, because the Up
No,
Oliver's,
I'm saying half go to Up Oliver right now.
which is this building.
Yep.
But I think there's a solution over there in and around the industrial area.
We would warmly welcome hearing about additional spaces. I think, you know, we did some legwork around available you know, public properties and previous school buildings, but we would certainly welcome to hear more about what might be a short-term rental, understanding that the impact will then be more teachers, administrator in the building, custodial in the building, safety in the building, nurse in the building, and all those additional costs. Again, you know, everything's an exchange. What are we willing to pay for?
I'll just add that we're considering this as a short-term goal until we can really think through the capacity challenges.
I feel like this is 3 years.
Yeah, capacity challenges at the Arlington, and as Denise mentioned, we have to outweigh the cost let's say we were able to add, in the best case scenario, in this adding space to the Arlington would be thinking through additional specialists, thinking through adding like a module. I can't even imagine Merlino liking that idea, and or renting space. And so that cost analysis is almost prohibited at this very moment. And it would take us a longer time to do that. It would not relieve the stress that Arlington Middle is experiencing. So for short-term solutions, among all the proposals that we sort of ran through, this seemed to be the most reasonable one, given that Up Leonard is actually a little bit smaller in that grade. And it's a favored school in the district, and we're not going to be making families choose this option. It's an open option. So we'll see how families react this couple nights that we're meeting with them.
I mean, we could find out on Wednesday that almost everyone wants a variance. And
That's
then
right.
we know
So
that
that'll
this
give us
is
an
not
idea.
going to work.
That this will not work.
Well, so I'm hearing what you're saying is that to occupy another space, that would be prohibitive.
It's cost prohibitive because, as we just mentioned, we'd have to staff it appropriately, and that would include oversight of administration, oversight of custodial staff, oversight of many FTEs to appropriately do that right now. And we believe this is a short-term solution until we redistrict and think about the long-term capacity challenges that we have.
Correct. And I'm happy in some way to follow up with the superintendent, who can follow up with you on how Wednesday's meetings were received.
And again, we're going to present it to your families, and we can report back with you all and say this families were in favor, or this is a no-go with our families, so we're back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see the data on the analysis of what's prohibitive, not prohibitive. Just again, because I think that's an important question. And then secondly, what are we talking about? How much space would we need to make it a viable, to make a viable goal of it? Again, consider and I know, speaking to somebody who's going to be unemployed in 3 years, 3 years is a short period of time. It may see, I mean, it's not a long.
Which I think is part of the challenge too, right? You don't want to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, create something. It's always hard to take something away.
Yeah, but if you're going from a swing space, which by the way, we're going to need anyway to build the Oliver, to build the Leahy, back to these beautiful things that we're going to build with all, God willing.
Nope, true.
I think it's easier to take that away.
We can put together some data for you for sure.
And then the last thing I'll say is that I think if we're going to spend money on some things, a 3-year or 4-year lease for a space that would ensure a low classroom size for many students, not just this cohort, but also keep people inside their neighborhood. I think it's a willing investment, especially if and this is tough because sometimes we say it's going to be a certain time period, it ends up being forever. But I think because of the new schools coming online, it can be made a deadline on it, and it could be forever. And the leases can say, and the council can vote on things that are saying, and it shall not be without a supermajority of the city council. You're saying like you can make things prohibitive to try to get renewed. And I only say that because we have some resources, and I think we have also some people who want to give other resources, considering that we are a receivership. This to me is a Lawrence solution to a Lawrence problem without any help from anyone else. Okay. What I want to say to you is that I think we have a cavalry of people who want to help, and we should not do this. Okay. We should get people to help us with this, including ourselves.
So
I want to put Lawrence at the top of that list. We have.
I agree with you, and we will put together some numbers for you to review. One of the solutions we've proposed 2 years in a row is to lease St. Mary's, and it's gone nowhere each of those years. But it is, unfortunately, it too is not in the neighborhood. So if we find something in the neighborhood, one of the things that will have to be brought into the cost benefit analysis is the retrofitting to actually make it look like a school, right? You're going to need classrooms, you're going to need sprinklers, you're going to need all of those things. I think we can work with Chris where I'm more than happy. I would love to see kids not leave their neighborhood. I really, really would. I definitely want to acknowledge that, you know, we've looked for leasing solutions that haven't panned out in the past.
Well, I think this is a very delicate subject because I think that increasing the number of students in a classroom will also affect them, affect their education because, like, for example, me, I came from the main campus, it's like bigger classrooms, more students in there, of course, and I didn't do very well in that. So now that I'm here, less students, and I feel like it's easier for teachers to be more focused on the students doing their work and stuff like that, unless it's adding more, unless it's adding, for example, another teacher into that to help the students, but because it also makes it harder for the teacher to be focused on so many students and, oh, I have to worry about this and that student. It's very hard for them and us to be in the same pace, in the same situation, as in, oh, like, he's not getting very well, oh, I forgot about this. I think it's a very delicate, and I don't really agree with the adding more students into a classroom because of that. It really affects us. Because not everybody works well in big groups, and I could be one, and I'm one of them. So that's why I don't think it's a very good idea. Thank you.
Thanks.
John?
Pat?
Yeah, Denise, thank you for this report. I have to be honest with you and say that I'm not comfortable with the cap, with the numbers. When you're looking at K-1 with 25, potential students in the class, they're babies, and they need, adults in the classroom with them. And then when you're looking at grades 2 to 8 with the probably 30 children in a classroom, you're asking the staff to implement an inclusion program. You're adding more and more to the teachers. I think now, especially during budget time, we need to really look at support for the staff if these are the numbers we're going to look at. I'm going to raise the flag again for the General Donovan School. Now, I know it probably needs a lot of work, but that school held 250 students, and it's in the neighborhood that we're talking about. I wonder what it would cost to bring that school back online. And it's a building that the city owns, I believe, and it seems like it's too bad we're not utilizing that space. We're talking about renting and going to other places, and we have a school right there. It's just a suggestion.
I think we put everything back on the table. I don't know how quickly we can do things for August, but I think everything's back on the table. I'm actually really encouraged by the response of the entire board around the urgency and the need for, productive class sizes.
Yeah, I would just say I think the general Dunham is on the table too. I mean, if you want the general Dunham for this, I just think that the amount of money you're going to spend to make it today a modern space, the way you could do an empty commercial space, is going to be prohibitive. But I don't know that. But if it's less or faster, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. We could find this. I think the point that's being said is that maybe we should have a task force to talk about the space in and around the Arlington neighborhood, because.
Yeah.
As we wait for the space at the Oliver and the Leahy to come up to, because what we're talking about is one of the poorest census tracts in the Commonwealth.
Right.
It's not just the Arlington School, and from what I've seen in the reports, even though the last reports we've seen about the MCAS didn't have names associated, I gotta think that they're still one of the underperforming schools in the Commonwealth, not just in Lawrence. Right. And so I would just encourage us and I don't know if we had a vote tonight or not, or if we were just being informed about this, but I think that the work of a task force to address a short-term, and I'm not talking about meeting 3 weeks from now or 4 weeks. I'm talking about meeting sometime tomorrow, the next day, or the day after, to talk about the immediate need for space at the Arlington District. To me, this is an issue that is as important as the high school graduation rate.
Yeah, I would also echo I think that as the budget discussions unfold, like we have to be putting resources into reducing the class sizes or better staffing up. I just think, all the points that have been raised about the quality of the education, and then I agree with the mayor that I think it would be really good, like let's get some options and figure out what costs what and what makes sense, and is there an option that we could invest in that also provides that overflow? Like what are you guys going to do with the Leahy and the Oliver Partnership School when they're under renovation? Because then you need space for 500 students while that 2 or 3 year process is. So I think that this is a huge question for us. I also I did have actually one other small question, somewhat related, which is there, and I don't know that this comes up at all or if this is a very idiosyncratic question, but I know the UP schools have a very particular educational approach and philosophy, and yet they're kind of acting as zoned schools for folks. And I would imagine that there are some parents who might not want to send their children there because of philosophical differences with that particular approach. So what happens in that case when there's a family that disagrees with the approach, but that's their zoned school?
So they're all neighborhood schools, right? And so when a family gets assigned to the UPS as they would to CDA or Leahy or anywhere else, the guiding principles and the policies are Lawrence Public Schools, principles and policies. I do understand that UP and some others have some additional policies around discipline or uniform. And honestly, what we have found is that when there is good communication early and often about what those differences are and any support families need to get to be able to support that policy or be able to follow that policy, those issues generally evaporate. And I say that in sincerity, in the sense that at the Family Resource Center, we're also the space where families come when they are frustrated and challenged at their schools. And when the UPS first opened in the first year, there were a lot of people coming to the door saying, "What? I don't understand. I don't get it." The UPS have done a very good job at, in the past couple of years, truly reaching out to families and communicating changes and expectations and why. What are the reasons? What's their philosophy? And the number of complaints for those schools has drastically diminished. So it is something that we haven't really had to sit back and think about and reflect about what do we do when people don't align, because the problem has really minimized over the last couple of years.
But if there's still a problem,
we typically work with them. I mean, we generally really encourage neighborhood schools, and we have people who don't like a policy at the Weatherby, and we don't say, great, you can go to the Frost.
Yeah.
We work with them to mediate a solution, and that includes having someone from the Family Resource Center go out to a meeting and collaborate between the principal or a counselor or the teacher or whatever the challenge may be to create a solution that works for that family.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Is there any issues around the progress that the UPS are making? I mean, we're going to use it as a place to put
Are we going to move away from enrollment at this point?
No.
Oh, you mean in terms of whether or not they want to go?
The problem is, like, we need a third baseman, right? And we're going to put a third baseman in, and maybe that's not the best third baseman.
Well, I think that's
So not
a
only we're
really
going to make
good
a
question.
kid, so we're not only going to make a kid go across town, we're going to make him go across town.
Up Leonard is actually one of the highest performing middle schools, if not the. It was up until we changed accountability, the way we rate accountability, it was a level 1 school. So if we cling to that, it's a level 1 school. Okay. So that went into a decision. I don't think we want to overpopulate or overburden a school that is struggling to move beyond a lower level. We're in full agreement with you on that.
Okay.
I pulled this off. Do you see? The enrollment's only 2.
I do have one question, and it's related to high school. So as we see the numbers of K through 8 going up, what are the expectations for space availability at the high school?
So I think that a couple of things. One is the high school in its redesign process has really looked at how they manage the volume of students in the building, and that includes with, you know, how grades are structured to early college, which allows students to be off-campus learning as a way to balance some of those needs. I think that those types of considerations and solutions are still a work in progress, but I think that we have seen some of those solutions bearing fruit.
Okay, thank you.
Any last comments?
Just a question on process, what's next?
Great, so I think Denise mentioned we're going to be meeting with families, and Como, the principal at UP, and the principal at CDA will be, just the principal.
Tarbox, and the principal from the Tarbox and the principal from
We'll be meeting
Up
with
Leonard.
families also to, you know, check in with them and offer them this proposal. And we're happy to come back to you all and share our learnings with that. And again, this is a short-term proposal right now to alleviate the pressure that CDA has next year and in the next 2 years. We're going to come back with you with long-term, both redistricting, this idea that we should have a subcommittee or a task force to think about the population increase that we are experiencing also in Lawrence.
I'd love to sit on that committee.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Also, can we just make a motion to have this presentation done to the city, from the city council?
What do you want the motion to be?
The population increase, this specific slide deck. I think it's very telling.
To send it to the city council?
To have these wonderful
present it.
staff people go and as a, we have places on the city council agenda that I could place stuff. I'd love to place this on the city council agenda. You don't have to, if you want me to wait, I can hold off on that.
Is that okay?
It's okay, I'll hold off on it if you want.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Next on the agenda, superintendent's goals. So if you look in your binder, the blue tab, superintendent job description. In that binder tab, at the back of that tab, you'll see the superintendent's self-assessment and goals. Gabby, we will have one of these wonderful binders ready for you at the next meeting. I'm sorry we didn't have it
That's all right.
tonight. You will come to regret that we give you a binder. So I'm sure you wish you had one right now.
Different document. That's all right, Joan, that's okay. This is budget goals, which.
This is, what Joan's handing out is budget
yeah,
goals,
that's
that's up next.
That's process, yeah. The goals should be
Okay.
in
They're in their
In your
binders.
binders, under superintendent job description, back of your binders, you will see a document entitled Superintendent Self-Assessment/Goals. Okay, this is the point where I'm going to remind everybody that we were given this document at the January meeting. We reviewed it at that meeting. I asked you to also, that we then emailed it to you, and I asked you to look it over before we came back for this meeting. I want to also remind everyone that the superintendent's self-assessment and goals is one of the steps in our evaluation of the superintendent's, of the superintendent. And critically here, that this is primarily about goals that advance the superintendent's individual professional development. So this is not going to have things that were in the 100-day report. This is not going to have things in the turnaround plan. This is going to very specifically go to items that address the superintendent's individual professional development over the course of the year. And this is not quite step one, but maybe step 1A in the superintendent evaluation process. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give everybody, why don't we take 3 minutes and people can look it over one more time. I know you've already looked it over at January. You looked it over multiple times before we got here tonight. But let's take three minutes and everybody can look it over one last time. I'll open it for comments if there are any, but I would like to vote tonight to approve these goals. Our superintendent is showing up at superintendent meetings, and she's the only one without approved goals. Okay, at this time, are there any comments or questions on the superintendent's self-assessment and goals? Okay, I would entertain a motion for the LAE to approve the superintendent's self-assessment and goals.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. Great. All right, next I would call your attention to the document that Joan just handed out. It says budget principles. So this is just a general statement around the budget making. But a way to basically establish sort of overarching principles for the budget process. We reviewed a draft of this at the January meeting. It was then amended with some pieces that I added and distributed out to everyone for review prior to this meeting. But this one was not, unlike the superintendent goals, this one was not presented in the form it was at the January meeting, but rather in this form post-January meeting. So again, why don't we take 3 minutes? It's not a long document and folks can read through it. And I would entertain any questions or comments on that. And if the body was in agreement on it, I would love to vote to approve budget principles. All right, I would open it up for discussion, comment, questions, anything.
I'd like to start making. Just to move it forward, I do make a motion for discussion to approve it, to approve the document for discussion.
You'd like to make
Yeah.
a motion to approve?
Yeah, and then once we do.
Okay. Can I just see if anybody else has questions or concerns on it first?
Oh, okay. Because you want to talk before we put the motion on the floor. That's okay.
Yeah, you make the motion and second, and then you can open it for discussion, right?
That's what I
Happy
thought.
to do it that, yeah.
That's okay.
Fair enough. You want to use real procedure again? Okay. We have a motion to approve.
Well, you know I'm going to do something ugly if I'm looking for procedure, right?
Yeah. I'm getting ready to table whatever's coming my way. All right. I will, we have a motion to approve on the floor. Can I get a second?
Second.
Can't second your own
I didn't.
motion.
Oh, did I make? Oh, I thought you made it.
No, you made it. All right, I'll second.
Okay, so the motion's second, and we'll open for discussion.
I think that, and I know that some of these details, like the hobgoblins of small minds, but I actually think this is an important thing so that we don't forget it. I think bureaucracies left to their own vices will forget some stuff that lots of people feel are important. And I think that in the strategic and equitable allocation of resources, the fact that you have equalizing spending as much as possible across schools is very important priority to have in this priority section. And the reviewing existing programs and strategies in schools to evaluate the effectiveness of current spending is very important to have. I think that creating a budget document that mirrors that of the city's current budget document is as important to both line and to department level spending. And I'd like to do that as a friendly amendment.
Yeah, I would definitely second that, because I would say that the way that the budget document was presented to us in our last meeting made it really difficult to understand how the priorities that we're stating are actually playing out in the budget, because of the way the categories were organized. And so it was my understanding from how the mayor described the city document that doing it in that way would make it easier for us to understand how the budget was a reflection of the priorities that we're stating. Otherwise, we were just seeing these general categories like staffing, right? And that tells me nothing about the equitability of staffing or how much staffing is going to ELL and SPED, or how, like, I just feel like we need to see either a different organization or a different level of detail in order to understand what we're looking at.
Other comments?
Yes.
Julia?
On the strategic and equitable allocation, I'd like to see another line reflecting improvement or building of new schools, or while I know that's a capital improvement, but I feel that if we don't list it, it might get lost somehow, especially when we have to go before the city council, and this is not a line item for on this board's budget allocation. And since we were talking about the situation that we're encountering with the number of students and all of that stuff, I feel that that should be a bullet point listed there.
Other comments? Ventura?
I guess I have a question. Also in the strategic and equitable allocation of resources, the first one, equalize spending as much as possible, I mean, sounds right, but I guess I'm curious, like, what's the current context then? Is there really a context of unequal spending? I'm just curious on, like, where this came from and a little bit around the current.
I mean, I can speak to the findings, which is the perception that resources are inequitable across our schools. And I think, again, one of the wondering is, can we start having conversations with the different stakeholders about what open architecture is and how each budget at schools reflects the need for each school? But there's still a perception out there, and we have to look very closely. Is that a perception? Is it true? Do some schools get more because some school leaders are savvier or they are better advocates? We want to make sure that that's not the case. So I think that's in part being reflected here.
Other comments?
So actually, I actually have a clarifying question to ask around that. So my understanding from the way you're characterizing the situation is that, I would imagine, I'm making maybe a crazy assumption, that the school spending is equitable in the sense if like the allocation is per pupil, then schools are getting money based on the number of students that they have, right? But because of open architecture, schools can choose to spend that in different ways. And so if a parent sees that, oh, there's this enrichment program at this school and my school doesn't have it, they think it's a question of inequitable spending rather than the decisions the schools are making about resource allocation.
That's
Gotcha.
But there's not a weighted student funding formula in place in Lawrence.
There's an allocation per pupil formula right now. And then there's differences because some of our schools are recipients of grants and different funding, so that also adds to the perception, and in some cases it's not a perception challenge. It is true that some of our schools have received additional funding
Because they've
for different
applied
reasons.
for it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe just to follow up, I mean, I really appreciate that. And again, I think the goal of equalized spending makes sense, but I just guess to that last point, to the degree that, I mean, it sounds like it's a perception issue. Part of it is that we're trying to make sure. Part of it is also, I'm hearing like it's an examination of, is spending actually not equal? You know, so I feel like there are a lot of questions underneath here. So, but again, when I read it, maybe just my pea brain, but when I read it, it sort of connotes to me that there's already an established challenge, you know, that spending is not equitable, even though it sounds like this year truly about exploration of that and messaging to families sort of as a priority. That makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's for families and for staff members in particular also who might be wondering, had the same wonderings.
So maybe the word, it should not be about equalizing, but more along the lines of transparency.
Yeah.
Because that's at the root, that, you know, the perception seems make it look like it's not equal. So.
Mr. Chair, when I read it as it's a priority for us to make sure that spending is equalized, regardless of whether or not it's today. I didn't question that piece of it. I just wanted to make, I mean, it says to me that it's a priority to us to equalize it, so that when we do find the unequal space, that we work to change that. But that's because I took it as a priority, not as an action item. But, you know, I don't know. I'm willing for it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Well, no, I just think, I mean, as with many things, the devil's kind of in the details, right? Because I think that it does, for me, beg the question of, do parents, for instance, and students to have any say in how a school implements its open architecture priorities and what enrichment programs they might like to see in their school, especially if they become aware of them at another school. That's one challenge, right? And then another challenge might be that if a particular school has some very proactive staff person that applies for grant funding, you clearly want to support and encourage that too. But then, like, how do you provide, like, for a school that doesn't have the capacity to do that, how do you provide some additional resources to them as well to make up for the fact that they didn't apply for that grant? But, you know, it's tricky.
So I think this is great feedback. And I think what I want to do is hold off on a vote. I want to get your friendly amendment in a version. I want to get Julia's suggestion in. I think we want to have a clearer statement around transparency, per Noemi's suggestion. and bring this back for March 13th. One thing I would like to point out, because we already are in process on the budget, but the way I view this, I have mentioned this to a couple of you, but is as a board, we are building the airplane and flying it at the same time relative to budget process. My hope is we can have a good budget process, a productive one right now, but that we are learning it as we go, and that will hopefully set us up for a much clearer process next year from the board perspective, where we can be very clear with Superintendent Paris and her team about the budget process that we want to see as they prepare that budget. And so this one is a learn as you go, and hopefully then take the lessons from that to have a very clear vision for it next year. To that end, I will also just mention that I have a professional development session in mind for the board around school budgeting with someone that is an expert on this and does this around the country, and has a real focus on school-based budgeting. And I will be in touch with all of you on that. But I did a quick session on it. It was illuminating. I promise you it will be something that I think every board member will learn from and will help as we, again, try to get to a very clear vision for the process next year. That said, I'll just come to one last piece, which is, I mentioned earlier, the budget subcommittee. Yes, Mr.
Just
Mayor.
before you move on, because you said the statement that this is kind of going on at the same time, I want to be 100% clear. Since we started, I've been talking about looking like the city budget. So if someone says to me in a later meeting, we're already downfield on this thing and it looks like this already, I'm going to find that unacceptable. I just think it's something that I've been talking. I don't get involved in the debates about the stuff that happens in the classroom and all that stuff. I think this is one of the things that's very important. It's a lot of work for the staff, but the work for us to understand what the money gets spent off is 100 times harder for us to figure it out. So I'd rather have the staff who gets paid a decent wage to make it easier for us to understand it. And I think that right way has been to make the document look just like the city budget document. So I just want to be clear about it so no one is surprised and saying that I'm acting like a bad person and I don't really care about what we people are doing. But I said, matter of fact, I brought the document over to people so they could look at it, made the CFO available for them. So I'm going to be, it's going to be very disappointing if the document that we can present it doesn't look like the city document.
So to that end, Mr. Mayor, I think the budget subcommittee, we will circle in the next few days on just scheduling, but I think the intent here is for the budget subcommittee to have multiple subcommittee hearings in March to review the budget, and I think to give the type of feedback you just gave, and to again ensure that we have a budget process that will enable us to vote on the budget, feeling that we as a board have a good understanding of it and that we approve of it. And then to take the lessons learned in this compacted schedule and turn it into a better process next year.
So I do have a comment also related to that. So in addition of having the new budget being had the similar template as the one for the city, we need to also have the one for last year in the same format so we can compare. Because otherwise we will not know, because we are comparing orange and apples.
Mr. Chair, I would humbly suggest that.
I agree with you.
No, I'm just saying I think that what I don't want to do is burden the staff with having to produce two documents. or to try to figure out how to make the last document fit into the new document.
But how do we know if changes were made?
But can I just
That's
make
the, again.
can I make a
sorry about
suggestion
that.
here, which is one, that members of the budget subcommittee do their best to attend at least one school-based meeting that we've been invited to see the origins of this process, and that then in the budget subcommittee, we start to hammer these things out. So obviously, I take your point to heart. I mean, like, we can't approve a budget if we can't have the context of the prior year. That makes perfect sense. So I think the budget subcommittee's got to make sure that's conveyed, and then work with the school department to do this in a manner that doesn't ask them to reinvent the wheel. And I think we can also find a way to meet the mayor's concerns on a new presentation for it. I'll just say, Mayor, I think we have to have conversations relative to, I understand wanting it in the city template. I think there are other things other members may want that haven't been presented, aren't in the way it's currently presented, that you may well find like, oh yeah, that's a good idea too. But these are things I think the budget subcommittee should be, this should be the work of the budget subcommittee.
Agreed. And I just want to just make a really clarifying point that the template that we use, the city side, has last year's spending. And yeah, that means that they have to go back and show where last year's spending was relative to this year's spending. So if you had 5 firefighters last year, it'll show 5 firefighters or 6 firefighters this year. They would have to do that work. I'm not saying they wouldn't. But so you don't need the other document. What you need, if they follow the template, it'll show you how many teachers there were at the Frost last year, and how many ESL teachers, and how many paraprofessionals, and how many janitors at that school. So what I'm suggesting to you, the template isn't, I'm not saying it's a panacea, but having done the budget on the city side, 5 years now as mayor, and 4 years before that as a city councilor, it is a ton more clear than the budget documents we receive from the schools. So there might be other stuff we want to do it, but we have to start at a place. I'm not asking for there might be, at the end of this conversation, the school budget might have some things that the city budget will want to do to it as well. And I think that's a general course of when people adapt basic concepts, they can improve on them. What I'm suggesting is the document itself is a basic concept that we are failing at making it clear about spending at the schoolhouse level. And I'm suggesting a solution to that. And I think that if people want to make it better, it's going to cause problems where they can't execute on that. So people may have ideas on it. And what I would humbly say is that those new ideas have not been talked about since the beginning of this board, while the budget document that we're clear about has been being talked about since the beginning of this board.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the mayor regarding the process. And as far as Ms. Laura's comment, I think that the school, on the school side, the budget has already been in process based on the same level that they're used to doing it in the past, so that it should be easy to compare. But I agree that in terms of understanding, and also to get a better sense, if the school comes back to us in need of an appropriation or anything else, it's easier to see if we have all the resources listed as it is in the city's budget. It's easier for us to, if we need to question as to why another staff member or why other resources are necessary, because then you can see a clearer picture of where it was. So I agree with the mayor on that.
I just want to say I haven't heard anyone disagree with the mayor.
Chair, can I say one more point? Sorry.
But it doesn't mean that there isn't a level of detail that may be even more precise than what the city template calls for.
But we should at least have what the city template has.
I don't think anybody up here is disagreeing with that. I think these are conversations for the budget subcommittee, though.
But the dead horse
Tora.
is right there if someone wants to beat it some more.
I just want to come back to the point, I think Jess may have been making this point earlier with open architecture, but just want to make sure, like, when we're talking, like, in the document about equitable, just very clear that, in my mind, equity is not the same as being equal. And so we really want to make sure that, again, equalized spending, like, maybe people have access to resources, but I would expect that given the needs of a particular context, it may not be equal, but it will be equitable if students are getting what they need. You know what I'm saying? So just, I know the word equitable comes up a couple of times in the document, both in the principles and then in the second bullet point of effective provisions, but they seem to be, the first one talks about similar funding levels versus the second one talking about equitable services for students with disabilities and language learners. So just want to make sure that, and we can take this to committee, Chair, but just that we're very clear about, again, being equitable versus equal as a goal.
Your point is well taken. And I think as we revise this draft, we will do our best to reflect that good point. Other comments? Any other comments?
Of course.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Mayor?
I just want to say the rest of this is really well written.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I mean, I'm saying like
Hey, this is a combination of two documents. It's
This is
a
well
combination
written.
of two documents.
You know,
And I think, I say sincerely, I think the feedback is really helpful. I mean that.
Yeah, and then we're
And I
stuck in a
think we
small
can
thing.
come up with a document that reflects what this body is talking about and reads in a more streamlined manner. So I appreciate that. Okay, any other comments on budget guidelines, budget process? All right, great. I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent for her to discuss her school calendar proposal. I do want to make clear, similar to the way we've been doing business on major items at the board, this is a discussion tonight with the possibility of a vote at our next meeting. But for tonight, this is an opportunity for the superintendent to present the calendar and for us to ask questions, express concerns.
Mr. Chair,
Julia?
just for the sake of this document, do we need a motion to table till the next meeting or anything like that? Since we only opened it up for discussion? We didn't call the vote.
Thank you, Julia, I appreciate that. So we have a motion to table the budget guidelines and budget process. Pat?
Point of information, does the superintendent have a timeline when this calendar has to go to the union?
I'm sorry, I'm stepping back one step here. My fault. This is my fault, Pat. I am stepping back to budget guidelines because we had a motion on the budget
I'm sorry.
guidelines to approve budget guidelines. I am requesting that we delay the vote in order to amend the document and present an amended document at the next meeting, so that what we will do for now is table the motion to approve. Can I get a second on that motion?
Second.
Motion second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion is tabled. All right, now I will turn the calendar over to the superintendent to run us through, and then we'll have questions and discussion on the calendar with the possibility of a vote as early as our next meeting. Superintendent.
Great, thank you. So tonight we have some recommendations for our district-wide calendar. In your documents this evening, you will see that we have the school calendar recommended guidelines and FAQ. You will also find the school calendar information and instructions, followed by the staff calendar and the family and student calendar. I'll start with sort of the guiding principles and how we arrived at this recommendation tonight, which is we're acknowledging three big themes tonight. We're acknowledging our chronic absenteeism. We're acknowledging our challenges related to teacher retention, and we're acknowledging some of the challenges that we have with respect to equity with our families and how they are challenged by multiple starts schedules, including half days. So the three things that you will note in our school district-wide calendar this year is that our start date for students this year is right before Labor Day. Last year, as you remember, we called half-day of school on our second week of school because we were experiencing a heat wave. The infrastructure of our buildings are quite old and we're not equipped to handle adding air conditioning, and in the few schools that the air conditioning does exist, we have inconsistencies of keeping our classrooms cool. You'll also note that in December, we are extending the December break to have students come back on January, yes, thank you. And that is because this year we experience what we continue to experience with our families is that they take that break for about a 2-week break. And so as it turns out this year, our New Year's Day falls on a Wednesday, and we would be asking students to come back on Thursday, followed by Friday. And this year we experienced quite a bit of students who did not come back, so we're adding the 2-week break. Lastly, you'll note in our calendar that we have adopted across the district professional development days. That means half-day release that are equal across the schools. And we're asking schools to maintain student hours and teacher hours that are also equitable, and that we can keep student hours with some guidelines and the amount of professional development hours that teachers also have within a range. So let's see, what else did I not address in here? As you can imagine, we've asked our schools to send proposals our way, and we're supporting them in this budget process to help them guide their ability to continue to have professional development, to continue to have the autonomy in the staffing, and of course, autonomy in the school calendar. So I will open it up for questions. There might be other things that I'm missing here, but those were the three big ones. And again, the acknowledgements were, again, chronic absenteeism, the challenge of teacher retention, and then the PD half days for our families, which was really problematic as I was listening to them in my listening tour, and for our staff.
Questions? Pat?
I like the idea of the school calendar being a little bit more uniform, and parents not being required to pick up a child at 2:30 in one school and 3 o'clock or 3:15 in another school. To that end, I'd just like to mention that I received an email from a parent, and it was very, very interesting. Her child attends the SES, and she calculated the amount of time her student is in school and compared it to the Frost and Gilmet. And what happened was, with the calculations, any student that attended the SES Annex receives approximately 11 fewer days than the children at the Frost and 13 fewer days than the children at the Gilmet. So when we're talking about equity and making sure that our children are receiving all the services, this is very significant and a good reason to support a calendar such as this.
Yeah, I just want to say I think that this is a very rational and good change. I'm particularly in favor of the sort of starting later in the summer, especially given the realities of climate change. I think it's been really, I think it's very hard, to have school start in the middle of August, and that tends to be much hotter than June, and so I think it's a smart decision, and I also think it frankly gives a little bit more of a break to our teachers, and teaching is an extraordinarily demanding job, and so I think the opportunity to have some more, like a bit longer summer break and a bit longer December break, those are great for teachers and hopefully for families as well.
Other comments? So I am fine with the first day of school change, fine with the extended winter break, fine with the change on the last day of school. I have deep concerns about the changes to professional development days, basically not enabling schools to conduct any professional development prior to August 26th. I've heard from school leaders at multiple schools who are concerned about that. I think this stands to undermine the agreements that we have with the MOs and sort of core principles around autonomy and professional development. I looked at the TNTP teacher survey that was conducted across the district, and very little in there relative to teachers who are unhappy with professional development that takes place before school starts and the couple weeks before school starts. And it really only applies to a handful of schools, but it is under open architecture sort of a core tenet that schools can do things differently. And so I don't mind the uniform nature around when students begin, when students end, how the winter break works, half days in the year. But the idea of telling schools that they can't conduct PD at certain times concerns me deeply. Other comments? Other questions?
I appreciate the concerns. I would say that one of the things that we learned is that, in particular with our EMO schools, we have them coming in between 2 and 3 additional weeks of professional development. And so we agree with you that professional development continues to be something that we value and we focus and believe it's a good thing for our teachers. And so as it turns out, for those particular schools, they have some of the highest turnaround rates of our teachers right now. And so even when they are receiving the PD, we don't keep them, we don't retain them. So that's another challenge that we face. So we invest in the teachers and then we don't retain them, and that continues to be a challenge. I think that we are encouraging our school leaders to be innovative in this case and offer the professional development that they have mutually agreed that is beneficial to their staff members so that their students can get better.
Yep. In the TNTP survey, the UP faculty rated their professional development at 7.1 out of 10, whereas the district average, which is vast majority schools that don't do any PD prior, or any PD that resembles what an UP does, come in at an average hovering somewhere around 4.6 out of 10. Professional development was of the sort of the 8 core areas reviewed by teachers was consistently at the bottom, with the exception of the UP schools. And so while they have a high attrition, which I think they should be held accountable for and need to address, there's nothing to indicate that it is linked to their professional development calendar. In fact, it's the one thing that their teachers give high ratings to. And in improving this calendar in the form it's currently in, we're basically going to tell any schools that did professional development prior to school starting that they can no longer do it that way. I'd also say, as someone who ran an organization that does professional development for teachers and worked with this district on professional development for teachers, booking PD sessions into the latter half of half days is a lot easier said than done. And the clock starts running right away on that time frame. And it's really hard to have effective PD jammed into half days when you could, with some planning, have some really fruitful development done before the kids get to school. But again, I would leave that at the discretion of principals to decide. And we saw in the presentation tonight that the principals said they like the autonomies they have. And I worry that this is going to curb those autonomies in some fundamental ways that you can never get back. And that will actually limit professional development, the effectiveness of it. I'll be the first to say that there are certainly areas that our EMOs can and must do better in. I'm not sure I see this as solving those problems.
We agree with you on professional development. In fact, we're going to be not only honoring that autonomy of professional development, but again, encouraging our school leaders. And what you'll learn is that our school leaders and these EMOs have given us proposals as how they can do that. And in these proposals, they've minimized the 3 weeks, for example, to 2 to 3 days, and they believe it would be suitable for their staff. In addition, we feel strongly that the professional development model that those 2 schools has not produced results, has not. And so we would argue that it continues to strain the challenge of retaining and recruiting teachers with the current model that they exercise. So I feel like we're operating under the guidance of our turnaround plan that has them earning autonomies, and it makes us accountable for them producing results.
Mr. Chair. I think looking at all the recommendations that the superintendent has been making and trying to work with the parents, trying to work with the teachers, the students, and everybody that is involved. And this is something that is going to be implemented the first time this year. We should be encouraging the teachers to maybe help us out here, because in every instance, every effort that is being made is placed on the students and the parents. Not as many requests have been made from the teachers. And for this first year, at least, maybe they can work with us so that the superintendent can try out these days that she's put in the calendar. And if it doesn't work, maybe next year, then we can look at it again and go back to the old ways or improve if it's something. But I think it's not too much to ask the teachers to work with us to put this in place to see how it fans out in the best interest of everybody involved.
I want to add to that one of the advantages of having all of the teachers having professional day or time at the same time is that there could potentially be the opportunity for cross professional development between the schools that are hard performing versus the ones that are not, because they can get ideas from each other, which is different from when you have, so it's easier to coordinate those type of training when everybody's having a set professional day. And again, in lieu of just keeping things in the way they are, that doesn't necessarily might change things. So I think this is a good way to try it and see if it works.
I mean, what we will effectively be saying if we do this is no professional development before August 26th. That's what it is. That's what it is. No professional development before August 26th.
Yeah, what
you gotta do it in this series of half days.
That's indeed.
I would suggest that you talk to school leaders you know about that, and that you ask families how they would feel about that, knowing that if a principal said, I want to start my professional development on August 23rd because I've got some ideas that I got from my teachers on things that we want to do, that they couldn't do that because the rule, the uniform rule is now not until August 26th.
Mr. Chair?
That's what this says.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just,
Mr. Mayor.
Isn't the beauty of the open architecture that a high-performing school, know how the caveat, a high-performing school can opt out of it? Isn't this like one of the places where you can let everyone accept? In the instance you're talking about some of these EMOs, we have a high-performing school. I think back again to, I thought the Leonard had some issues, but apparently it's a stellar school. It is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many of those we feel we have in our district that we can let them do those things. And I'm generally in support of the superintendent's schedule, the superintendent's schedule. But if the one EMO that's having this great exercise with it, isn't that what the open architecture would do? That everybody else has to do it the way we're doing because they're not excelling in the same way.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Superintendent, but if a school applied for that change, the way it would be paid for, if approved, would be different than it is currently.
So what we're proposing is that, to your point, we're exercising earned autonomies, and so we would differentiate. So for those schools who have earned their autonomy, in this case they're high-performing and we can define what success is, then we're willing to differentiate for them. And we have proposals in that way. Then for schools who have not earned that autonomy and continue to exercise the same model with no results, then we're going to pull back on those autonomies.
But
and
if,
so the funding
if it was
attached,
approved, would the funding change?
correct.
It would come out of their individual school
Not
budget,
not
right?
necessarily, no. No, because
Not necessarily.
that's correct. So in an example, one of the proposals that we have is that the school would add an additional 4 days of professional development and would bring back their teachers for 2 days. And they have given us a budget of what that would cost. And so they will bring that to budget, and we'll have a discussion around that.
Again, I just think this is one of those instances where you can tell people, hey, you got to earn that, and everybody else got to get in line. And I think
So we have one of our highest performing schools right now being told that they can no longer do PD the way they want to do it. And understand that the revised submissions they've put in have been put in because they have been told that they have to submit revised submissions. It's not what they want to do, and that schools have also been told that if they want to go and try to get approval for these changes, so they don't have the autonomy to do it anymore, they have to get approval from Central now that if it is approved, it's going to come out of their individual school budgets, which they won't be able to afford. Mm. This is effectively going to kill PD autonomy. And so that when put all the current EMOs aside, when Lawrence Community Works decides that they want to partner with, community college, Northern Essex, to start an LPS school under an EMO agreement, and that one of the things they want to do is some wonderful teacher training PD for an Indigenous teacher pipeline that would begin August 2nd. You wouldn't be allowed to. You'd have to petition for it, but then it would have to come out of your individual school budget, not under the funding structure we currently have, which gives all the schools autonomy to make these decisions. So just understand, when you approve that, it's not just about up, which can be controversial and people can like it or not, or it's not just about Lawrence Family Day, it's about the potential community partnership you could grow in the future and limiting the PD there. Just understand that that's what this is doing if we approve it.
I do have a question.
Could we, I feel like there's no easy answer to any of this, right? We're weighing a lot of competing priorities. We're trying to give schools and families time off as well, right? And maybe I'm frivolous, but I think that there are probably a lot of teachers that would welcome the extra days of summer vacation as much as they might welcome some extra PD days. So I feel like why don't we try this year, and then we can circle back with teachers and schools and kind of explicitly address this question. We're not carving this into stone tablets here. a lot of this is going to be a work in progress, and
So I would look at the TNTP survey of Lawrence teachers that was just done, that we looked at the overview for at the last meeting. Because what it tells you is that the schools that are going to get reined in on this do not have teachers complaining about the PD. They're complaining about other things that are valid, but they're not complaining about the PD, and that in fact, the harshest critique of PD in the Lawrence district is that the schools that are on the schedule that you're effectively trying to get these other schools to conform to.
So I want to.
So I just would say then, what is the impetus then to do this? I mean, I suspect that on a tight budget, perhaps it's to help rein in spending by EMOs who do, again, like I'm not here to defend EMOs, like the EMOs cost more than our regular schools. So perhaps that's the impetus, but let's not call it about teacher attrition when teachers are citing other reasons that they're leaving our schools, not just the EMOs. And I would highly recommend that folks look at that TNTP survey in depth. I also think if we're really doing open architecture the right way, this about principal coaching. If your teachers are burning out, how are we talking to our school leaders about supporting our teachers? How are we supporting our teachers? How to, a centralized edict doesn't solve the problem. It usually just creates new ones.
With respect to the survey data, that's just one data point, so I want to be very careful to just mention one data point in terms of the overall research and our recommendation. And so that's just something I want to put out there. And in fact, that's not the intent of why we surveyed our teachers. That is very confidential data that we are using to support our school leaders and to support our teachers. I think the framing, again, here is that we embrace open architecture, we believe in these autonomies, that we are responsible and accountable, and that schools need to earn their autonomies. So we will entertain proposals that differentiate from that, including and especially schools that have earned that autonomy, and we will fund them and we will continue to support them. But to not listen to the data and the research and not try to address this in at least this very way would be irresponsible for us.
And I think we need to agree to disagree on that. What I would ask is that we have, I think this proposal here is very clear about the core. I think that we need this more developed to understand exactly what we're voting for when this comes up for a vote in March, to understand the budgetary implications and to understand very specifically what that process is for a school to gain PD flexibility and how it works exactly if we're going to vote on this. I think we need that very clear in writing.
Which is, to be clear again, what would you need clearly in writing?
I think the budgetary implications behind this, I think.
You mean the budget impact if we do it or don't?
I mean, specifically to this notion that a school can apply to get out of the parameters set here. What is the process to apply for that?
Got it.
How is that decision made? And what are the budgetary implications of that?
Okay.
Meaning, do they have to pay for it themselves, or will central office pay for it?
Okay.
Other questions, comments, concerns on the calendar?
I just had one other question, and it might have been implicit in what you were saying, Cynthia, but I'm just wondering if so. When we're tracking absenteeism, are you basically telling us that, like, the days around sort of the beginning or end of school and around the beginning or end of summer vacation are the times of the highest absentee? Those are the spikes.
Right, so asking students to come back early and then the big break in December. And of course, we have it again in February and April, but the big one is in December right now.
Okay.
Given what we've learned from previous years and specific to this year, but we also said that we would circle back to this challenge of chronic absenteeism.
Right.
So we'll bring you that data, and we're also taking other measures. This is just one towards that.
Okay, because I was thinking that the absenteeism problem probably has several layers
It
to
does,
it, right?
it does.
There's that piece,
Yep.
which is around the vacation and timing, and then there's other pieces that are around totally other issues.
And to be fair, and to John's point, this challenge of retaining and recruiting is not just about professional development. This is just, again, one
Yep.
thing, right? So,
Okay, thank you.
Great. Pat?
John, I agree with you as far as setting parameters for schools that want to opt out. But I think we still can't lose sight of the days that are consistent throughout the district and the opportunities for peer coaching and sharing best practices. That's something that's worth its weight in gold as far as I'm concerned. And I like that opportunity of schools being able to opt out, or not opt out, but apply for additional time. But I think we need to set up some kind of a line item, a budget that's available for them to apply, the schools to apply, and hopefully, you know, be able to do PD for their own building.
Ventura?
Yeah, I mean, I think just agreeing on that. I mean, I think I see with this plan a clear strategy to address the chronic absenteeism with the line in the start and trying, you know, like I really see that. You know, I do worry, and not just for the EMOs, but for all schools in this notion of, you know, I'm hearing now earned autonomy, which I agree with, but I guess I don't know what the process is for a school to earn autonomies, and I'd like to know that as a board member to see what goes into it. And because I think that in this model, and I can speak also having been a former school leader, like just personally having 2 days only with teachers in the summer before school started, for me would be laughable, just because I need time to build my culture, I need time to practice routines, I need time to, you know what I mean? So I'd want that autonomy as a school leader, and if there's an earned autonomy model, I'd want to know what it is I need to do to demonstrate whether I earn it or not. And I think the other piece is that, you know, I mean, I do appreciate the concerns of where this is coming from, and I also am struggling with, this feels like potentially a slippery slope where we're talking about summer PD is what I'm kind of seeing it, but then what about curriculum later? Or what about staff? You know, and so I'm not inferring that that's what you're doing, Superintendent, but I think without me seeing a clear sort of plan for what does earned autonomy look like and in what ways, like this feels, I am a little nervous about this. I think some of the questions with the budget, I do wonder as well, like, you know, under this current proposal, teacher hours maintain at levels that do not exceed 100 hours above the total for students. So I'm just curious, compared currently versus the future, like how many schools are we talking about? How much money are we talking about? And if there is a cost saving, is the plan to use that funding to offset something else? Like, I guess I'm not understanding sort of just the financial picture of that strategy. And I guess the final thing I'd say is, you know, I want to hold schools accountable, support them, especially I'd say our EMO schools, where we as a district have a contract with them, and so we should expect a certain level of performance. I guess what I worry about with this proposal is that I don't know what their, you know, it's their responsibility for us to say, we have concerns about your staff retention, you know, this is your model, what are you gonna do about it? I'm not hearing that here. I'm hearing what we as a district are telling them to do about it, but I guess maybe if those conversations have been had, I don't know what they are, but it just feels to me that, you know, if we're concerned about performance of any school, including EMO schools, I want to make sure we have a mechanism to ramp up pressure and make sure that we're getting results for what we're, you know, what we're paying, I mean, quite frankly. And just based on this information, it seems to me like some of the onus is actually taken off of them. Like, I want to see what they would be coming up with them. It's their responsibility, you know, for what we're providing. And so that's just additional information that, you know, now or later, I would just love to hear what's been the engagement with them, what is their plan, you know, and again, it's our mechanism we need to put in place to hold them accountable if they're not achieving at the levels we want. But I do worry a bit about, again, this notion of, again, I heard equity is one of the third, but I see a lot of equal here. And so if we're talking about equity, like, I want to make sure that schools are able to really structure their experience for their teachers, for their students in a way that gets at the student needs. And so, you know, I guess it's just repeating a theme I said earlier, and I know we'll follow up on this, but I also really appreciate, the chronic absenteeism, the burnout. I totally get it. So I'm not just saying all this and I want to be a part of the solution, but just to show those are some of the things that concern me. Or I guess I'd want to talk through a little bit more about this.
Sure, so I can address all of those. I think the earned autonomy's criteria and how we define success is a great one for this board to define moving forward, and I think we should have that conversation in the coming months with goals and objectives for our turnaround plan. In the interim, I think that and we're talking, to be fair and clear, less than 5 schools who fall in this predicament of requesting additional time for their staff members, and they've all have proposals that we're entertaining. So you should know that all 3 schools, 4 of them actually, have sent us proposals for how they would continue to provide professional development outside of this calendar. And in addition, they continue to have systematic time during the school year to host professional development. So the professional development continues to exist throughout the school year, which we believe is a very good systematic way of continuing to support, to build the capacity and the skills of teachers. The other question you had was specific to, I think I lost your last question, Ventura.
I can't keep track myself, so apologies.
Oh, equity.
The equity versus equal, yeah.
Yeah, it's why we're differentiating for this, for the proposals, and we should have the conversation as how do we define earned autonomies. This board, together, we should define what's the criteria for earned autonomies. To John's question about process and how that happens, for this budget cycle, we just asked them to send us a proposal, right? So is there a better process? I'm guessing that together we can come up with one once we define what earned autonomies are and how we keep each school accountable, independent of where they stand with EMOs or their freestanding schools. So we should decide that as a board.
Yep. And just a point of clarification. So of the 5 or so schools, how many that we're talking about? That's helpful to even know the frame. How many are run by EMOs versus non?
2 of them.
So only 2 of the ones that would be affected?
We have two MOs, and under that, there's 2 schools who fall out of that range who are asking for different proposals.
So 4 of the 5 schools that are asking for some sort of...
There's 4 schools who, I'm sorry? Yeah, there's 4 schools that are impacted by this change, and out of those 4 schools, 3 have submitted proposals.
And 2 of them are EMOs and 2 of them are regulars?
No, 2 EMOs and 1 traditional. Yes, 2 EMOs operate the 3 schools, and then 1 is a traditional school. Yes.
So 4 schools,
4
3
schools.
of them are run by an EMO.
Correct.
Okay. And again, we have a contract with these organizations that they run these schools on our behalf. And again, I think we need to hold them accountable if we're not happy with their performance. I would also imagine, though, that not having those MOUs or contracts in front of me, that there's probably some expectation, especially in those kind of schools around autonomy with regards to things like PD, that I would just be concerned about curtailing without actually putting the onus on them to have to come up with a solution, because they're the ones that we're paying the finances to educate our kids. And if they're not meeting that, and they still say they think they need 3 weeks in the summer with their teachers to pull this off, then okay, but what are you going to do about the teacher burnout issue if that indeed is an issue? So it just feels like, again, we're letting them off the hook a little bit here, because at least my read on this, with all respect, is, so it's like we're telling them what to do. It's like we're assessing the problem, putting in place a solution where that's their job. And if they can't come up with a solution, then maybe we should think about that contract bigger picture, So, especially because 3 of the 4 are EMO schools, and if they're going to argue that they need a certain PD model, and I can't also, and you said this earlier, that training is important. It's one of the things that in the entry plan, teachers, paraprofessionals, admin always for more training time. It seems hard now to support something that is actually taking it away carte blanche without the ability to really still root it in this open architecture model. So I don't know, I'm struggling with this one a little bit.
I just remembered your comment.
Okay.
You asked about process with the EMOs, and
yeah.
so I have standing meetings with our CEOs of the EMOs, and I've also convened them as a group to have these conversations. So I just wanted to address that in terms of their input and where they stand on this and their reaction, their comments, their counter proposals.
Other comments? Okay. So we have two computer donations that we have to approve. You'll see a letter from Ipsen Bioscience, who would like to gift 36 Dell laptops to the Frost Middle School. And the Brockway Smith Company would like to gift 10 compact Elite 8300, I presume computers, to the Frost Middle School. I don't know, Superintendent, if you want to say anything else about these?
We just, we are delighted that they're being generous, and we'd like for you to all entertain this proposal and accept these donations.
I make a motion to accept both as presented.
I get a second on that?
Second.
Discussion? I just have a question. Is there a particular reason why these were donated to just one of the schools?
It's a great question. I think they just have a relationship with that community, and so they opted to send it. You know, we do think about, and back to this question of equity, we prefer that our partners and community members who are interested in supporting us do it kind of a central way, so that then we can decide. But in this particular case, they're connected to these communities.
Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion on this? So we have a motion to approve on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries, and the motion was for both. Next up, adoption of the minutes from January 9th, 2019, executive session, and January 9th, 2019, regular meeting. A reminder, the executive session was the superintendent evaluation training. We'll take these one at a time because I believe there were some who attended one but not both. So could I get a motion to adopt the minutes of the executive session? Could I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Abstain.
I'm going to abstain as well from the executive one because I wasn't here.
The motion carries with members Silverio and Anders abstaining. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes of the January 9th, 2019 regular meeting?
So moved.
Could I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
All those opposed? The motion carries with member Silverio abstaining. Any closing items anyone wants to bring up or mention or talk about? Mayor?
No, I just wanted to say that I think that of all the board meetings we've had, that this was really productive and thoughtful and engaging in ways that I did not expect it to be this evening, and I just wanted to thank the board members for a lively conversation about important things facing our district.
Any other comments?
I mean, I just want to say, I mean, I agree with that, and, you know, support the superintendent wholeheartedly in everything that she's doing. Really appreciated the lively discussion. I think this is a good example of, again, like, there are issues that are really hard, and we're going to discuss them and dig deep, but I think I just want to reiterate that it's all in the spirit of best outcome for our kids, and, again, really trust the leadership of our fearless leader here.
Other comments? Okay, I will echo those sentiments. I want to thank the superintendent for her hard work to date, for her presentation tonight on her 100-day listening tour. All of her thought and hard work, and the way she pours herself into the job. Her team as well. Gabby, we want to thank you. We want to thank the union for their presence here. Bob, just because you rock, we like what you're doing at HLC, and you have the largest biceps in the district, and I don't want to mess with you. We thank you, and I just will note in closing, I may disagree with the superintendent, but I know that she always is trying to do what's best for the district, and sometimes members of the board will disagree on what that course is, but I never question the superintendent's heart and mind as she moves through this. And the one thing that we have seen clearly, we have a superintendent who can manage this system incredibly well through crisis, and that counts for a lot. So with that, we are adjourned.